My mother died with $22 in her checking account and a reputation for being half crazy. So when a cheap estate lawyer handed me a rusted key to a boarded-up cottage she supposedly owned in the woods, I expected raccoons and rot. I didn't expect a fortune. The lawyer's office smelled like stale Folgers and desperation. It was the kind of place tucked above a dying strip mall, where the carpet was worn thin by people who didn't have the money to be there. Mr. Finch sat across from me, a man who looked like he had been slowly deflating for the past 10 years. He pushed a manila envelope across the faux wood desk. It slid with a dry, rasping sound. "That's it," Finch said, his voice flat. "The entirety of Margaret's estate." I didn't reach for it right away. I just stared at the brownish paper. My mother had been dead for 3 weeks. A heart attack in the aisle of a discount grocery store. It was a mundane end to a chaotic life. She had spent my entire childhood chasing ghosts, moving us from apartment to apartment, leaving behind a trail of unpaid bills and burnt bridges. We hadn't spoken in 4 years. I had paid for her cremation out of pocket, half out of obligation, half out of a desperate need to finalize the paperwork of my childhood. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single, heavy iron key, mottled with orange rust, and a deed printed on thick, yellowing paper. I looked up at Finch. "What is this?" "Property," Finch replied, tapping a cheap ballpoint pen against his desk pad. "A parcel up off County Road 9, near the old quarry. There's a structure on it. A cottage, technically. Your mother bought it in cash 12 years ago. Paid the property taxes on time every year, right up until last month." I let out a short, hollow laugh. My mother didn't have cash. She couldn't afford a new set of tires, let alone real estate. Finch shrugged, a barely perceptible lift of his narrow shoulders. "The deed says otherwise. It's yours now, Dean. Do with it what you want. Sell the land, bulldoze the structure. But I'd go take a look first. The county has been threatening to condemn the building for being an eyesore." I took the key. It felt heavy in my palm, cold, unforgiving. The drive out to County Road 9 took 45 minutes, pulling me away from the gray sprawl of the city and into the dense, damp pine forests that choked the hillsides. The sky was an unbroken sheet of white, threatening rain, but never quite delivering. I kept the radio off. The silence in the cab of my truck was loud, filled with the static of old arguments. "Why can't you just hold down a normal job, Mom?" "You don't understand, Dean. I have responsibilities." Responsibilities. That was always her excuse. She was always busy, always writing furiously in cheap spiral notebooks, always locking herself in her room to make hushed phone calls. I had spent my 20s convinced she was a paranoid schizophrenic. The doctors I tried to get her to see hadn't entirely disagreed, but she had refused treatment. She just vanished further into her own head. The turnoff for the property wasn't marked. It was just a break in the tree line, a rutted dirt track completely swallowed by blackberry brambles and overgrown ferns. I had to put the truck in 4-wheel drive to force my way through. Branches scraped against the paint, screeching like nails on a chalkboard. The track ended abruptly in a small clearing, and there it was. It wasn't a cottage. Not really. It was a shack. The roof sagged under the weight of decades of accumulated pine needles. The exterior was clad in untreated cedar that had weathered to the color of wet ash. Every single window was boarded up with thick plywood, secured by heavy lag bolts. The front door was a solid slab of steel, completely out of place on a wooden shack, with 3 separate deadbolts and a heavy padlock. I sat in the truck for a long time, the engine idling, the heater blowing warm air against my shins. It looked like a tomb. It looked like the manifestation of her paranoia. I almost put the truck in reverse. I almost drove away, intent on calling Finch and telling him to just let the county take it. But the rusted key in my pocket felt like a splinter. It demanded attention. I killed the engine, grabbed a flashlight and a heavy crowbar from the toolbox in the bed of the truck. The air outside was biting. It smelled of wet earth and decaying wood. My boots crunched loudly on the gravel as I approached the steel door. The padlock was a heavy-duty master lock. I slid the rusted iron key into the cylinder. It stuck for a second, fighting me, before a sharp twist broke the internal corrosion with a loud crack. The shackle popped open. The deadbolts were next. 1, 2, 3. I grabbed the door handle and pulled. The hinges screamed in protest, a harsh, metallic wail that echoed through the quiet woods. The door swung outward, revealing a wall of absolute darkness. The air that rolled out of the cabin hit me in the face. It didn't smell like rot or animal feces or damp mold, which is what I expected from a derelict cabin. It smelled like dust, dry, undisturbed, and sterile, like a museum archive. I clicked on my heavy mag light. The bright white beam cut through the gloom, illuminating millions of dust motes dancing in the air. I stepped over the threshold. The flashlight beam swept across the room, and I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I lowered the crowbar slowly. The interior of the cabin was entirely hollowed out. There were no interior walls. No kitchen. No bed. Just one massive, open space. And it was completely, meticulously full. The beam of my flashlight trembled slightly. I gripped the aluminum barrel tighter, forcing my hand to steady. Rows upon rows of heavy-duty metal shelving units dominated the room. They stretched from the floor all the way up to the exposed wooden rafters, creating narrow aisles that reminded me of the basement of a university library. And on every single shelf, perfectly aligned, were identical, heavy-duty black plastic storage bins. Hundreds of them. This wasn't the den of a hoarder. There was no trash, no old newspapers stacked haphazardly, no empty cans. The concrete floor was swept clean. I walked down the first aisle. The silence in the room was absolute, pressing against my eardrums. Every step I took felt invasive. I shined the light on the nearest bin. There was a label on the front, printed from a label maker. Crisp black text on a white background. 4 and 12 2009 to 8 22 2010. Dates. I moved to the next bin. 08 to 23 2010 to 11/05 2011. It was chronological. At the very back of the room, behind the last row of shelves, sat a massive industrial steel desk. An old green banker's lamp sat on the corner. Next to it was a leather desk chair that looked like it had seen thousands of hours of use. I walked over to it, my boots echoing off the concrete. The desk was clear, save for a single, thick, leather-bound ledger resting perfectly in the center. I set the flashlight down on the desk so the beam reflected off the far wall, providing a wash of ambient light to the space. I reached out and touched the cover of the ledger. The leather was supple, worn smooth by the oils of my mother's hands. I opened it. The pages were filled with my mother's cramped, frantic handwriting. But it wasn't the chaotic scribbling I remembered from my childhood. It was a highly structured accounting system. Columns were drawn with a ruler, names, dates, dollar amounts, and underneath each entry, a brief, sterile description. I ran my finger down the first page. Miller, T. $14,500. Medical debt satisfied. C. Bin 42. Henderson, R. $8,200. Bail satisfied. C. Bin 43. Abernathy, L. $34,000. Relocation satisfied. C. Bin 44. My chest tightened. I knew these names. Thomas Miller was the guy who ran the hardware store in town. He had almost lost his business when his wife got sick with cancer. Ray Henderson was a kid I went to high school with who got popped for possession and was facing hard time before a phantom benefactor paid his bail and got him a lawyer. Lila Abernathy was a woman from our old apartment building who fled an abusive husband in the dead of night. I flipped the page. More names, more massive dollar amounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions cumulatively. Where the hell did she get this kind of money? My mother shopped at thrift stores. She drove a rusted-out Honda Civic that burned oil. She ate canned soup. Yet here in this ledger, she was moving capital like a silent venture capitalist, bailing out half the county. I stepped away from the desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed to see what was in the bins. I walked back to the shelf, found bin 44, and pulled it down. It was heavy. I set it on the concrete floor and popped the plastic latches. Inside were files, thick manila folders. I pulled out the first one. It was labeled Abernathy, L. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of police reports, medical records documenting the abuse, and then bank transfer receipts. Wire transfers originating from an offshore account in the Caymans, routed through 3 different shell companies before landing in an escrow account that paid for a house in New Mexico. Underneath the financial documents was a handwritten letter. Margaret, we made it. He doesn't know where we are. The girls are enrolled in school. I don't know how you did this or why you chose us, but you saved our lives. I owe you a debt I can never repay. Lila. I dropped the letter back into the bin like it was on fire. I was having trouble pulling air into my lungs. My mother wasn't crazy. She wasn't a deadbeat. She was a ghost, a machine. She had been operating a massive subterranean charity network right under everyone's noses. But the question remained, how? You don't just stumble into millions of dollars in untraceable cash. I went back to the desk. I flipped to the very back of the ledger, looking for an origin point, an initial deposit, a source. The last entry in the book wasn't a financial transaction. It was written in thick, red ink. It stood out violently against the blue lines of the paper. Dean, if you are reading this, I am dead. The account is empty. The money served its purpose, but the source of the money requires your attention. Look under the floorboards beneath the desk. I'm sorry for the burden. I'm sorry for everything. I stared at the red ink until the words blurred. The anger I had held onto for years, the resentment, it all suddenly felt profoundly misplaced, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. I pushed the heavy leather chair out of the way. I dropped to my knees on the cold concrete. There was a large, faded Persian rug beneath the desk. I grabbed the edge and hauled it back. The concrete floor didn't continue under the desk. Instead, there was a heavy steel plate, about 3 feet by 3 feet, set flush into the floor. In the center of the plate was a recessed handle. I grabbed the crowbar I had brought in with me. I wedged the flat edge into the seam between the steel plate and the concrete, bearing down with all my weight. The plate groaned, fighting friction and rust, before finally popping upward an inch. I dropped the crowbar, grabbed the recessed handle with both hands, and heaved. The steel plate swung open on massive, hidden hinges. A rush of stale, freezing air blasted up from the dark, square hull, carrying the distinct, metallic smell of old copper and gun oil. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it down. A narrow set of concrete stairs descended into the darkness. I didn't want to go down there. Every instinct I had screamed at me to close the hatch, walk away, and burn the cabin to the ground. But I couldn't. The woman I thought I knew was a fiction. The truth was down those stairs. I put my foot on the first step and began to descend into the dark. The stairs were poured concrete, steep and narrow, lit only by the erratic sweep of my flashlight. The air grew 10 degrees colder with every step. The smell of gun oil and copper grew thicker, layering the back of my throat with a metallic tang. I counted 22 steps before my boots hit a solid, level floor. I swept the beam around the subterranean room. It was smaller than the cabin above, perhaps 20 by 20 feet, but heavily reinforced. The walls were corrugated steel, painted a sterile, institutional gray. A dehumidifier hummed in the corner, a low, constant vibration that I felt through the soles of my boots. A single, heavy-duty extension cord snaked down the stairwell, providing power. In the center of the room sat a long folding table. On it rested a bulky, outdated desktop computer, a dot matrix printer, and a massive steel safe. The safe wasn't the kind you'd find in a suburban bedroom. It was a vintage Mosler, a hulking square of iron that looked like it had been salvaged from a demolished bank branch. I walked over to the table. Next to the keyboard was a spiral-bound notebook. I flipped it open. It was full of alphanumeric strings, passwords, encryption keys. I pulled out the rolling chair and sat down. The monitor was asleep. I tapped the space bar. The CRT screen flared to life with a static crackle, casting a harsh, blue-white glow over the room. It asked for a password. I typed the first string from the notebook. Incorrect. I typed the second. Access granted. The desktop was stark black. There was only one folder icon. It was labeled Kessler and Wade. I knew that name. Everyone in the tri-state area knew that name. They were a massive logistics and chemical processing conglomerate. They owned the rail lines, the processing plants, the politicians, and most of the real estate on the eastern seaboard. They were ubiquitous, and they were notoriously ruthless. Bossy, I double-clicked the folder. The screen filled with directories, thousands of them. I opened the first one. It was a scanned PDF of an internal memo dated 14 years ago. I leaned in, squinting at the pixelated text. It was a cost-benefit analysis regarding a chemical spill in a town called Oak Haven. The memo detailed the expected mortality rate of the local population over a 20-year period due to groundwater contamination. Below that was the projected cost of a full environmental cleanup. Below that, the projected cost of settling wrongful death lawsuits. The math was laid out with sociopathic precision. The settlements were cheaper. The recommendation was to bury the report and let the town drink the water. The memo was signed by the board of directors. I sat back, the air suddenly feeling too thin to breathe. I clicked through more files. Pension funds raided and hidden in dummy corporations. Sabotaged safety equipment at a smelting plant to save on maintenance downtime, resulting in 3 fatalities. Paid off state inspectors. Blackmailed judges. It was an empire built on a foundation of calculated murder, and my mother had everything. I looked at the Mosler safe. The combination dial was heavy, brushed steel. I looked back at the spiral notebook. The last page had 3 numbers scrawled at the bottom. 42 Udama 1789. I spun the dial. Right to 42, left, past 42, to 17, right to 89. I grabbed the heavy chrome handle and pulled. The thick door swung open with a heavy, oiled click. Inside, stacked floor to ceiling, were the physical originals, the hard copies, red ink signatures, the raw, irrefutable proof. I finally understood. My mother wasn't an angel. She was a parasite feeding on a monster. She must have worked for them. An archivist, a low-level auditor, someone invisible who had access to the basement storage. She had spent years quietly photocopying, stealing, compiling. She hadn't gone to the press. The press was owned by Kessler and Wade. The DOJ was infiltrated by Kessler and Wade. Instead, she had gone to them. She had named her price. The ledger upstairs wasn't just a record of charity. It was a record of extortion. She was bleeding a multi-billion-dollar corporation dry, millions at a time, and redistributing their blood money to the people they trampled, to the desperate, to the dying. The memories of my childhood hit me with the force of a physical blow. The midnight packing, the abrupt changes in schools, the way she would check the rearview mirror constantly, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, the time she threw away all my Halloween candy because she thought someone had tampered with it. She wasn't crazy. She was surviving. She was fighting a silent war against an adversary that could crush her like a bug. Armed with nothing but a dead man's switch, an unparalleled nerve. She gave up any chance at a normal life. She let me hate her. She let me believe she was broken and delusional because the alternative, telling me the truth, would have made me a target. She isolated herself to keep the blast radius contained. A sharp, shrill noise cut through the heavy silence of the bunker. I flinched, my knee slamming into the metal desk. It was a phone ringing. I spun around. On the far end of the folding table, half hidden behind a stack of printer paper, was a heavy black landline receiver. It had no dial pad, just a direct line. It rang again, a harsh, mechanical, jarring sound that seemed impossibly loud in the concrete room. My mother was dead. Nobody should be calling this number. I stared at the black plastic handset. It rang a third time. If I didn't answer it, they would know something was wrong. If I did answer it, I was stepping into the arena. I took a deep breath, the cold air burning my lungs. I reached out and picked up the receiver. I didn't say a word. I just held it to my ear. There was a moment of static, then a smooth, baritone voice. "Margaret." I kept my mouth shut. The silence stretched tight between us, vibrating with static. The voice on the other end sighed. It wasn't an angry sound. It was the tired exhale of a man reviewing a spreadsheet. "No, of course not. The telemetry on her pacemaker zeroed out 3 weeks ago. We confirmed the cremation. You must be Dean. My grip on the plastic handset tightened until my knuckles popped. Who is this? My name is Sullivan, the voice said evenly. I handle risk management for Kessler and Wade. Your mother and I had a long-standing mutually beneficial arrangement, an arrangement that, unfortunately, expired with her. You're the people she blackmailed, I said, my voice sounding thin and foreign in the subterranean room. Extortion is such an ugly word, Sullivan replied. We preferred to think of it as a licensing fee. She retained possession of certain proprietary documents, and we paid a premium for exclusivity. But the licensor is deceased. The contract is void. We want our property back, Dean. It's not your property, I snapped, looking at the Mosler safe, at the stacks of damning paper. It's evidence. You poisoned an entire town. You killed people for a quarterly margin. Sullivan chuckled. It was a dry, awful sound. Oh, save the moral indignation. It's tedious. You've read the ledgers upstairs, haven't you? Your mother played Robin Hood, yes, but she did it with our gold. She was just as complicit. She sat on those files for 12 years while we continued our operations. She didn't stop us. She just took a cut. The words hit me like a physical strike. I wanted to scream at him, to defend her, but the cold logic of it choked the words in my throat. He was right. She traded justice for leverage. She compromised. Here's the situation, Dean, Sullivan continued, his tone shifting into something hard and flat. We have tracked the location of that landline. I currently have a retrieval team turning off County Road 9. They will be at the cottage in less than 4 minutes. They are not lawyers. They are problem solvers. Panic spiked in my chest, hot and sharp. I looked at the concrete stairs leading up to the heavy steel hatch. I was trapped in a concrete box. But I am a businessman, Sullivan said. Oh, violence is messy. It attracts attention. So I am offering you a severance package. There is a secondary duffel bag in the safe. Look for it. I kept the phone wedged against my ear, stepping over to the open Mosler. On the bottom shelf, pushed far into the back, was a heavy canvas bag. I pulled it out and unzipped it with one hand. Bundles of $100 bills. Shrink-wrapped, sequential. $5 million, Sullivan said. Untraceable cash, it's yours. Take the bag, walk up the stairs, leave the safe open. The team will arrive, secure the property, and let you drive away. You never saw anything, we never spoke. You get to start a new life and we get our files. Everyone wins. And if I say no, then you die in that basement, Sullivan said, without a trace of malice. The team will seal the hatch, weld it shut, and pour a fresh concrete pad over it. You will suffocate in darkness, and 100 years from now nobody will remember you existed. 4 minutes, maybe 3 now. I looked at the canvas bag. $5 million. It was an escape velocity. It was the end of struggling. It was everything my mother had never allowed us to have. Then I looked at the desk, at the archaic dot matrix printer, the massive desktop tower, and right next to the keyboard, resting incongruously on the gray steel, was a bright, red, heavy-duty USB drive. It was attached to a thick plastic tag. In case of breach, my mother wasn't stupid. She knew this day would come. She knew she would die, and she knew they would come for the files. She had built a dead man's switch. Dean, Sullivan's voice cut through my thoughts. I need an answer. The team is on the driveway. I could hear it now, a faint, distant rumble of heavy engines bleeding through the concrete ceiling, tires, crushing gravel. I thought of Lila Abernathy, hiding in New Mexico. I thought of Thomas Miller keeping his store open. I thought of the people of Oak Haven drinking poison while the board of directors bought yachts. My mother had compromised. She had lived in the gray area, but she left the final choice to me. I put the phone down on the desk. I didn't hang it up. I grabbed the red USB drive and shoved it into the port on the front of the computer tower. The screen flickered. A command prompt window opened instantly, lines of green code scrolling down the black background at lightning speed. Executing Dead Man Protocol, establishing secure connections, uploading archive to Noi Times, Washington Post, SEC, DOJ tip line. A progress bar appeared. It crawled agonizingly slow. 12%, 24%. Upstairs, a massive, thunderous crash shook the ceiling. They were breaching the reinforced door. Heavy boots pounded on the concrete floor above, echoing down the air vent. 36%, 54%. Down here, a voice shouted from the cabin above. I found the hatch. 72%. 89%. The heavy steel plate at the top of the stairs groaned in protest as someone tried to force it, but the internal deadbolt was engaged. I had thrown the locking bar when I came down. They began hammering against the steel with something heavy, a sledgehammer. The sound was deafening, ringing in the small concrete room like a cracked bell. 98%, 100%, upload complete, files distributed. I stared at the screen for 1 second, a wild, reckless laugh escaping my throat. I had just burned down a multi-billion-dollar empire, and I had burned my own escape route. The sledgehammer struck the hatch again. The steel locking bar buckled slightly. They would be through in less than a minute. I grabbed the heavy canvas duffel bag. $5 million. I couldn't leave it, but I couldn't take it up those stairs. I scanned the room wildly. Behind the server rack, a heavy, rusted iron grate set into the wall near the floor, an air intake, or an old drainage culvert leading to the quarry. I ran to it, dropping to my knees. The bolts were ancient, oxidized completely. I grabbed my crowbar from the desk, jammed the forked end behind the grate, and threw my entire body weight backward. The iron screamed, then snapped free, sending me tumbling backward into the server rack. A dark, narrow tunnel stretched out in front of me, smelling of wet earth and pine needles. The quarry. It led outside. The hatch at the top of the stairs blew open with a deafening crash, the steel plates slamming against the concrete wall. Tactical flashlights cut through the gloom, painting the walls with harsh, blinding light. Move, move, move. I shoved the heavy duffel bag into the tunnel, scrambled in headfirst after it, and pulled the iron grate back into place just as the boots hit the bottom of the stairs. I crawled blindly into the damp darkness, dragging the weight of $5 million and a dead woman's legacy behind me, moving toward the faint, gray light of the woods. If this story hooked you, hit that like button and subscribe. What a wild ending. What would you have done? Would you take the $5 million and walk away, or hit that upload button to burn the corrupt corporation to the ground? Drop a comment below and let me know your choice. Share this video with a friend who loves a good mystery, and make sure your notifications are turned on so you never miss our next deep dive.